The morning sky over Earth was clear, quiet, and ordinary. But sometimes the most ordinary days are the ones that break history in half. It started like any other, with people going to work, ships moving in orbit, satellites humming their soft mechanical song. Then, without warning, every major screen on Earth flickered. Civilian broadcasts froze. Military channels were forced open. Private frequencies went dark. For a moment, the entire planet was confused, millions of eyes lifting toward the skies as if they could sense what was about to come. Then the black screen filled with a golden emblem, the mark of the Galactic Council. The moment that symbol appeared, every military bunker, every defense station, every intelligence network on the planet went silent. Not because they didn't know what it meant, but because they knew exactly what it did. The Council didn't call to talk. The Council only called when it wanted something. And when the Council wanted something, entire civilizations vanished. The broadcast began with a low, deep voice that didn't belong to any human tongue. It had that cold, layered echo that always felt like it came from something too big to care. The translation appeared on every screen in every language on Earth. People of Earth, the voice said, your time of defiance ends today. Then the screen shifted. It wasn't a face they saw. It was a council chamber, massive, carved in golden stone, filled with alien figures standing in half-shadow. Their eyes glowed faintly. None of them smiled. Their leader stepped forward, a tall, serpent-like creature draped in flowing black robes, its long fingers gripping the edge of the stand like a judge ready to pass a sentence. You will surrender, it said calmly, your resources, your fleets, and your sovereignty will be placed under council control. In exchange, you will be allowed to exist. If you do not comply, it paused, letting the silence settle across the planet like a storm. The consequences will be beyond your imagination. Across the cities, people gathered in the streets, staring at the screens in stunned silence. In homes, in cafes, in orbital stations, soldiers, workers, and families watched the same transmission. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a threat. A very clear one. The Council wasn't hiding its intention. It never did. To them, Earth was just another stubborn world that needed to be brought to heel, like all the others they'd conquered. But what the Council didn't know, what no one outside Earth truly understood, was that humanity had changed. The galaxy remembered the humans from centuries ago. A fractured, loud, chaotic species still learning how to survive among the stars. That was the image the Council carried in their archives. But the Earth they were talking to now wasn't that Earth. It had been silent. Yes. It had been patient. Yes. But silence wasn't weakness. It was calculation. And the patience wasn't surrender. It was a hunter waiting for someone foolish enough to step into its trap. In the great cities, alarms quietly armed themselves beneath the surface. Invisible defense shields whispered awake above the atmosphere, energy lines crawling through orbital grids like veins pulsing with quiet power. But none of that showed on the surface. On the surface, Earth looked calm. On the surface, Earth looked like it was listening. Inside a hidden mountain in the northern hemisphere, deep below layers of rock and security systems, the Terran command center flickered to life. It wasn't some polished political stage. It was built of cold steel and quiet purpose. Generals stood around long tables. Old war satellites synced with new quantum defense nets. People who had spent their entire lives preparing for this exact moment moved with smooth, practiced precision. They didn't shout. They didn't panic. They didn't need to. They'd always known this day would come. On one wall, the Council broadcast continued to play. The alien speaker leaned closer to the camera, its thin mouth stretching into what it probably thought was a smile. You have 24 cycles, it said. We will not repeat ourselves. Behind it, other alien figures murmured, confident, almost bored. They had done this many times before. Every world eventually surrendered. Fear always did the work for them. But Earth was different. In the Terran command, a single voice broke the silence. Admiral Rourke, broad shoulders, gray hair, eyes like cold stone, stepped forward. His voice was low and steady. They finally said it, he murmured. Around him, The command crew stood straighter. No one in that room had fear in their eyes. They had been waiting. Far above the planet, in the silent darkness of orbit, massive black structures floated beyond the range of standard alien scanners. They weren't officially part of any defense treaty. They didn't appear in any Council intelligence files. They weren't supposed to exist at all. But they did. Humanity had built them over decades, piece by piece, far from the galaxy's curious eyes. And now, for the first time, their systems blinked awake in perfect, silent synchronization. The Council didn't know that humanity didn't negotiate with threats anymore. It didn't need to. It had learned the hard way what happens when you give a predator your throat. Down on the streets, ordinary people stood watching the screen. The aliens thought this moment would break them. But something else began to spread instead. A quiet, simmering kind of anger. Humans didn't like being told to kneel. They never had. Whispers started to move through the crowd like wind moving through dry leaves. One voice said, "They're doing it again." Another answered, "Not this time." And slowly, without any speeches, without any music, the fear that the Council expected to see never arrived. It was replaced with something harder. Something colder. The broadcast continued, the alien leader boasting about the Council's power, its fleets, its reach. But the humans weren't listening anymore. Not really. The soldiers in the bunkers already knew their positions. The fleet commanders already knew their codes. And the civilians, they remembered their history. The Council's greatest mistake wasn't threatening Earth. It was assuming Earth was alone. In orbit, one by one, defense satellites aligned like silent eyes focusing on their prey. Under the oceans, black submarines with no official insignia began to move. On the far edge of the solar system, something else stirred. A shadow fleet that had been built for exactly this kind of day. Humanity had not wasted its silence. It had weaponized it. The alien voice finished its speech. Your answer will determine your survival. Then the feed cut off, leaving only static and the golden emblem burning on the screen. The world stared at it for a heartbeat, and then a second, and then the emblem disappeared as Terran Command seized control of their own systems again. The media feeds blinked back to life. Government channels turned black. Military encryption sealed itself tighter than iron. The world above continued to look calm, but below, the war machine was breathing again. In the Council chambers, light years away, the alien leaders leaned back in their chairs, pleased with themselves. They'll comply, one of them hissed in its low, rasping voice. They always do. They're human. Another chuckled, its spine jaw clicking like a trap closing shut. They won't even last a day. They didn't see the storm they had just woken up. They didn't know Earth was already preparing a response, not with panic, but with precision. And for the first time in a long time, humanity wasn't the one listening to threats. It was the galaxy that was about to hear one. In the dark orbit of the moon, the first Leviathan-class warship, Vigilant Dawn, powered up its engines. Its crew stood at their stations in absolute silence, the glow of steel-blue lights reflecting on their faces. On its bridge, Captain Ellis whispered a single line into the comms. "Send the message." A signal left the ship like a blade slicing through the void. It didn't carry fear. It carried the weight of a sleeping beast waking up. And across every hidden human base, every ship, every silent bunker on Earth, one single line appeared on black screens. It wasn't long. It wasn't complicated. Prepare to answer. The Council had expected surrender. But Earth was about to give them something else entirely. The kind of answer that galaxies remember for centuries. The Galactic Council chamber was a place that was never quiet, but today it was different. Today it was full of smug laughter, long sharp alien smiles and the cold arrogance of rulers who believed themselves untouchable. The great room glowed with golden light bouncing off walls of crystal, a symbol of their power built on centuries of conquest. The Council had blackmailed dozens of worlds before, from burning planets to bending empires, and every single one had bowed. Why would Earth be any different? They sat on their thrones shaped like jagged metal and bone, watching the transmission from Earth-end, watching that human planet sit under their ultimatum. To them it was already done. To them, Humans were nothing more than another stubborn species that needed to be reminded of its place. The High Speaker, a tall, serpent-bodied alien with long black robes that dragged behind him like the tail of a predator, slithered forward to the center dais, raising one clawed hand to silence the councillors. His eyes glowed faint green, narrow and cold. "They will obey," he hissed, his voice smooth like oil. "Humans are loud, but they always kneel. It is their nature to bark before they break." The councillors around him chuckled, their laughs like the scraping of knives against glass. One leaned forward, a massive four-armed creature with a crown of bone spikes, and said, "They are a small world with loud mouths. We have fleets older than their entire civilization. It will take one order." One. Around the chamber, diplomats and generals exchanged looks of agreement. Their fleets were already positioned near the outer edge of the solar system. Cloaked probes floated near the asteroid belts. Trade networks had already been cut. They had designed the threat carefully, the kind that left no escape route but surrender. "We will give them one cycle," another alien said, a thin-winged creature with a mouth full of pointed teeth. "When their leaders beg for mercy, we will take what we want. They will be useful slaves." Laughter spread through the chamber again. But not everyone was laughing. A small group of older councillors sat silent at the back of the hall, their faces unreadable, their eyes fixed on the golden projection of Earth hovering at the center. They remembered. They were old enough to remember what most in the chamber had chosen to forget. The last war with humans, long before treaties, long before the council considered them irrelevant. It had been short, brutal, and expensive. Entire fleets had been swallowed by black fire in the void. Humans didn't beg. They burned. The memory was buried under layers of propaganda, but some of the old ones hadn't forgotten. One of them, a scaled, black-eyed elder, leaned toward the High Speaker and said softly, "Be careful with that world." The High Speaker turned his glowing eyes toward the elder, the corners of his mouth lifting into a cruel smile. "Be careful? With them?" he said, his voice filled with amusement. "They are loud apes in a small blue nest. They build noise, not empires." The elder did not smile. Noise can hide storms. But his warning was drowned in the noise of more laughter. The younger councillors didn't care about old wars. To them, history was just another thing conquered. They had grown up in power, believing their fleets were the edge of the universe. They couldn't imagine losing. On the upper deck of the chamber, massive holoscreens showed council fleets already on the move. Thousands of ships gleamed in the cold black of space, their weapon systems armed, their formation elegant and deadly. They moved like a wall of metal stretching toward Earth. Each fleet commander sent back confirmation codes. Ready to enforce compliance, one admiral said in a deep, reptilian growl, "Earth will not resist. They never do." The High Speaker lifted both arms high, his robes flowing behind him like smoke. "Then let the galaxy witness," he declared. "Humanity will kneel before the stars or be erased from them." The councillors cheered, their voices echoing against the golden walls, a sound so confident it didn't sound like war. It sounded like a celebration already decided. A few of the elders exchanged quiet glances. They knew something the others didn't. The humans had gone silent years ago, not because they were weak, but because silence was their favorite mask. Long ago, the galaxy learned to fear the noise of human war. But the silence meant the storm had already started. In the council's secure war room, an alien strategist leaned over the glowing map of the solar system, tapping a claw against the faint holographic shield lines. "Their defenses are weak," he said. "We will strike from orbit and cripple their fleet before they even see us coming." He sounded bored. Another strategist leaned in with a grin that showed a row of sharp teeth. "I almost hope they resist," he said. "It will make the display more enjoyable." The old councillor's voice was low but firm. "If they resist, it won't be enjoyable. It will be war." But no one listened to him. The younger ones laughed. "War? With humans?" one hissed. "Old ghost stories. We are not the fools of your time." They didn't understand that human wars didn't begin with noise. They began with stillness, with silence in the void, with cold shadows moving where no one was looking. And somewhere, far away, above a small blue planet, that silence had already begun to move. The council chamber lights dimmed slightly as the high speaker issued the final order. "Blackmail has been delivered," he said. "The prey has 24 cycles. If they refuse, we strike." His voice was calm, too calm, like someone so used to power that he'd forgotten what it meant to be challenged. In their arrogance, the council believed the next transmission they would receive from Earth would be one of surrender. Pleading voices. Broken pride. Another civilization brought to heel. That was how it had always been. But they didn't understand what humanity had become while the galaxy stopped paying attention. They didn't know that deep below the blue skies, old war machines were waking up. They didn't know that above the orbit, human ships were already aligning in perfect silence. They didn't know that the answer they expected would not come as a plea. It would come as something far colder. And when it came, the galaxy would stop laughing far beneath the cities, deeper than any civilian had ever been allowed to go. The war rooms of Earth were already awake long before the council finished their laughing. It wasn't the kind of place that existed on maps. There were no windows, no names on the walls, only steel and silence. The ceiling was lined with cold white lights, the walls were layered with thick armored plating, and in the center of it all stood the Terran command table. A single long structure covered in flickering blue holomaps of the solar system. Red dots bloomed across its surface like poison in water. Council fleets, hundreds of ships, maybe thousands, closing in from every angle. But no one in that room panicked. No one shouted. There were no speeches about fear. These people had been waiting for this exact day for years, maybe decades. Admiral Rourke stood at the head of the table, hands behind his back, his face carved with the kind of calm only a soldier who had seen too many wars could have. His uniform was black and clean, but his eyes were the real weapon, steady, sharp, cold. Around him, generals, analysts, and silent operatives from every corner of Earth's defense structure moved like a machine that had been oiled for years and was finally turning at full speed. No one needed to be told what to do. They had drilled for this. They had planned for this. The room's main screen showed the official council message still replaying in a corner: "You will surrender. You will obey." The voice had weight, but it didn't carry fear here. Here, it only sounded like an invitation to finally open a door they had kept locked for too long. Fleet signatures confirmed, a young officer said from one console, her voice sharp, controlled. Council armadas entering outer system perimeter, distance 14 hours and closing. Any changes in formation? Admiral Rourke asked without looking at her. None. Straight line. Standard intimidation posture. Rourke let out a small, humorless breath through his nose. They think we're going to run. Sir, another officer spoke, this one older, his voice lower. Protocol Ghost is still sealed. Are we initiating? The Admiral finally turned to face them. The blue light from the maps flickered across the sharp lines of his face. Why do you think we built it? He asked. His tone wasn't loud, but every head in the room snapped up. A silent nod passed through the ranks like a signal through a living thing. A second later, encrypted keys were inserted into consoles. Old switches turned, and the room changed. The soft hum of standby systems turned into a low, steady rumble. Black panels on the far wall slid open, revealing long-dormant command lines. Screens flickered with the words, Ghost Protocol, Operation Active. Somewhere above them, deep in orbit, human stealth platforms began to light up like ghosts crawling out of the dark. These platforms had no name in any treaty, no existence in any official database. They had been built for one purpose only, to be the moment no one saw coming. Back in the room, a young lieutenant's eyes widened as she read the returning data. Sir, we have full fleet synchronization. Rourke's lips twitched into something that almost looked like a smile, but wasn't. Good, he said quietly. Let's make them regret knocking. The massive holomap zoomed outward, showing human fleet movements across the entire system. Dozens of cloaked Leviathan-class warships stirred like sleeping giants beneath the darkness of the asteroid belts. Subfleets hidden near the icy moons of Jupiter activated their long-range cannons. Quantum relays that had been silent for years came alive with faint pulses of energy. If someone had been watching Earth from the outside, they would have seen nothing. But in the dark, something was moving. Council fleet expected to breach line in 13 hours, the officer announced. We won't wait for them to breach, Rourke replied. We control the tempo. On another side of the room, an old intelligence director leaned on the table. They think they're blackmailing prey, he said. They're wrong, Rourke answered. They're walking into a cage. Across Earth, in underground launch sites buried beneath mountains and oceans, command crews received silent activation codes. No loud alarms. No speeches. Just steady lights turning from blue to red. Pilots walked into hangars in silence, their helmets tucked under their arms, their boots echoing against the steel floors. They had known this was coming. Every one of them had grown up hearing the stories about the Council, the way it conquered worlds with fear. But this time, Earth wasn't afraid. Above the moon, orbital shipyards opened their hidden docks. Sleek black warships that had never been seen on any galactic channel began to drift out of the shadows like predators with slow, confident movements. These weren't defense vessels. These were hunters. Each ship bore no name, only a single glowing insignia on their hulls, the symbol of Earth's silent fleet. Inside Terran Command, Admiral Rourke gave a single nod, and the communications officer transmitted a short burst message to all units across the planet. 3 words. Nothing else. Shadow plan active. The room didn't cheer. No one celebrated. The sound of quiet readiness was heavier than any roar. The Council's ultimatum had been delivered, and as far as they were concerned, humanity would fold. But humanity had never been a species that bent easily, not when cornered, not when threatened. Do we respond to the Council transmission? The communications officer asked. Rourke's eyes lifted slowly, his voice cold as winter steel. Yes, he said, but not with words. Around the galaxy, the Council expected begging, silence, or surrender. What they didn't expect was a trap older than their arrogance. In the deepest levels of Earth's defense network, hidden beneath encrypted layers no alien code could break, a countdown began to tick. The moment they crossed into human territory, they wouldn't be facing a weak world. They would be stepping into the crosshairs of something they never saw coming. Humanity wasn't panicking. Humanity was planning. And far beyond the walls of that underground room, in the endless dark of space, a storm was gathering. Not the loud, chaotic storm of desperation, but the kind of storm that moves without sound, strikes without warning, and leaves nothing but silence in its wake. The silence of something that was no longer prey. The silence of hunters waiting in the dark in the vast darkness between stars. Just beyond the reach of alien scanners, something in the solar system began to stir. The Council fleets were closing in with their polished formations, long silver lines of warships moving like blades through the void, their admirals proud and unafraid. They believed Earth was just another primitive world about to fold under pressure, another soft target ready to kneel. But they didn't know that the blackmail message they had sent had done something they never expected. It hadn't caused panic. It had triggered a trap that had been waiting for years. A trap built in silence, hidden in the dark, buried deep behind every smile Earth had ever given the galaxy. In the war room beneath the mountain, Admiral Rourke stood with his hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the massive holomap hovering above the table. Red dots moved closer. Council ships. Thousands of them. Around the room, officers worked like a machine that had no room for fear. Every man and woman there knew what was coming. They weren't afraid of war. They were made for it. Council fleets now 10 hours from outer line, a calm voice reported. Formation still tight. No changes in posture. They still think they have us boxed in. They don't know what they've walked into, Rourke said quietly. His voice wasn't raised, but it rolled through the room like the low growl of a storm. On the far wall, the Ghost Protocol interface burned in quiet blue light. Systems that hadn't seen daylight in years began to hum to life. In the shadows between planets, deep in orbit around cold moons and floating between asteroids, humanity's hidden fleet was already moving. Black hulls absorbed starlight like predators hiding in the tall grass, every ship designed to disappear until the moment it struck. Shadow fleet in full sync, one operator announced. Leviathan class is standing by at 3 vectors. Interceptor wings ready. Cloak is holding steady. Good, Rourke answered. His lips twitched slightly, the closest thing he ever gave to a smile. Let's make them check their sky. Far above the planet, in the void beyond Mars, the first of the cloaked dreadnoughts shifted its course. It moved like a giant waking up, silent, graceful, deadly. No council scanner saw it. No alien admiral felt it. The humans had built these ships in secret, knowing the galaxy's arrogance would always blind them to what they didn't expect. On the other side of the system, near Saturn's rings, defense grids that had been disguised as mining stations opened like flowers blooming in darkness. Long rail cannons unfolded, their black barrels aligning toward the stars. Orbital mines rotated into perfect formation. And in the depths of Jupiter's shadow, stealth carriers released Hunter-class frigates that vanished as quickly as they appeared, like wolves disappearing into the fog. Inside the Council flagship, Admiral Zakar leaned back in his chair, his scaled hands resting comfortably on the armrests. He had done this many times. Worlds always broke the same way. First they panicked, then they begged, then they burned. His communications officer turned to him, a grin spreading across its bone-plated face. No response from Earth, it hissed. Of course, Zakar replied, eyes gleaming with arrogance. They're deciding how to kneel. But the silence from Earth wasn't weakness. It was a blade being sharpened. Back on Earth, a single encrypted pulse left Terran command, invisible to every alien eye. It moved like a whisper through space, a whisper that every human ship heard loud and clear. Inside the Leviathan-class dreadnought Vigilant Dawn, Captain Ellis received the signal and said just 2 words, "Showtime, sir." The ship's cloak held, but its weapons came alive. Railguns glowing faint blue, engines roaring softly, targeting systems locking on Council entry points. One by one, every hidden ship followed. A sudden spike on the Council Admiral's display made Zakar frown. For a heartbeat, his scanners picked up something, shadows shifting at the edge of the system. He leaned forward. What was that? Interference, his tech officer answered quickly. Probably their defense satellites shutting down. Zakar relaxed back into his chair. He didn't realize that the interference wasn't something shutting down. It was something waking up. In the Terran bunker, Admiral Rourke gave the order without raising his voice. Phase 1, he said. And then it began. Every human satellite and cloaked station across the solar system flipped its configuration. Signals that had once made Earth look open and weak now turned into noise bombs, scattering Council scans into useless static. The alien fleet was blind. In less than 5 minutes, every ship approaching Earth thought it was still looking at a defenseless planet. But behind that invisible curtain, there were hundreds of human warships watching them like wolves watching a herd of prey. Council scanners are fried, an officer confirmed. They are blind and they don't even know it yet. Good, Rourke murmured. Let them keep walking forward. The trap had been set long ago. Earth had learned from centuries of history. When stronger powers try to control you, you don't fight them on their terms. You build the ground beneath their feet until it collapses under them. The Council had never fought a quiet enemy. They had never faced a prey that built its cage around the hunter. Above the moon, 3 Leviathan-class dreadnoughts silently repositioned, forming the first line of fire. In the cold of deep space, nothing moved that the Council could see. But everything was already in place. And then, Earth finally responded. Not with words. Not with speeches. Not with surrender. A single pulse left the Terran flagship, cutting through the void like a cold blade. It wasn't translated. It wasn't polite. It was just 3 words, delivered in the universal military channel the Council loved to use for its threats. Check your sky. When those 3 words reached the Council fleet bridge, Admiral Zakar's smile faltered for the first time. He stared at the dark screen in front of him. His senses were still clear, or so he thought. But somewhere deep in his old instinct, something twisted. Something told him that the prey wasn't afraid. And when prey isn't afraid, the predator should be. The countdown had already begun. Humanity wasn't just answering the blackmail. It was turning the hunter into the hunted. The silence in the stars was about to end. But when it did, it wouldn't be the Council speaking. It would be Earth. The Council fleet hung at the edge of the solar system like a wall of steel and arrogance, rows of massive alien warships glittering with gold and silver armor, engines burning like a trail of suns, their banners casting long shadows across the void. Every admiral on those ships believed they were about to witness Earth's surrender, not a battle. They had brought their best fleets, their most powerful ships, the same ones that had broken dozens of civilizations. Their comms were already prepared for the broadcast of humanity's surrender speech. They didn't know that while they watched the darkness beyond their scanners, the darkness was already watching them back. Humanity had never spoken softly when it came to survival, but this time it didn't speak at all. It waited. On the flagship bridge, Admiral Zekar leaned forward in his command chair, eyes scanning the console. They should have responded by now, he hissed, his scaled hands tightening around the armrests. His officers exchanged uncertain looks. Silence from Earth wasn't normal. Silence meant something else, something they couldn't quite name. Scan again, Zekar ordered. His voice was calm, but underneath it, a crack had formed. Scanners show nothing, Admiral, the officer replied. Empty system. Standard defenses. No major movement. It was a lie, though no one on that ship knew it yet. The Council's entire sensor net was blind, fried by Earth's countermeasures that moved like invisible knives through their channels. Every image they saw was a forgery. Every scan was a trick. They were floating in the dark without even realizing it. Meanwhile, on Earth, in the hidden war rooms beneath stone and steel, Admiral Rourke stood surrounded by flickering blue light as hundreds of human ships silently aligned into attack formation. Shadow fleets that had been sleeping for years moved in silence, each dreadnought drifting into position with the patience of a predator ready to strike. On the big map, glowing red Council ships blinked like targets waiting to be erased. Rourke raised his hand slowly, the gesture simple, almost quiet, but every commander on every human ship knew what it meant. Phase 2, he said. Above the moon, the Leviathan-class warship Vigilant Dawn shimmered into half-visibility, its black hull absorbing the light of distant stars. Its railguns, as long as cities, rotated smoothly into position. Across the dark, 3 more Leviathans came alive like sleeping beasts. Fleets stationed near Jupiter and Saturn began their burn toward the Council formation. From beneath the oceans, submarine launch silos sent encrypted signals into orbit. From the icy silence beyond Pluto, cloaked satellites whispered to each other like old soldiers waking up from a long rest. Inside the Council fleet, a tremor ran through the officers. They couldn't explain it, but they felt it, the shift in the air, the pressure of something they couldn't see. One officer at the comm station swallowed hard and whispered, "Admiral, incoming transmission." Zekar frowned. "From Earth." The officer nodded slowly. Single line. No encryption. No salute. Just 3 words. Zekar leaned closer to the glowing screen. Never threaten humanity. For the first time since leaving Council space, the bridge went completely silent. No one laughed. No one smirked. The words weren't loud, but they hit like a blade slipping between armor plates. They weren't a plea. They weren't a negotiation. They were a warning. A promise. "Scan again," Zekar snapped, but his voice wasn't as strong as before. His crew obeyed, but the scans showed nothing, the same empty darkness. It was too quiet, too still. And then, the stars blinked. At first, it was just a flicker, a ripple along the edge of the system, as if the void itself had taken a breath. Then, one by one, black shapes emerged from nothing. They weren't flashing with bright colors like Council ships. They didn't announce themselves with energy signatures. They appeared like shadows given form. Human warships. Hundreds of them. Dreadnoughts. Hunters. Leviathans. Ships so massive their silhouettes swallowed stars. Contact. Multiple contacts. one of Zekar's officers screamed, claws digging into the console. Zekar stood up slowly, disbelief clawing through his chest. How many? Too many, came the whisper. We're surrounded. And it was true. The Council fleet, so proud, so confident, was now locked in a noose of black steel. Human ships blocked every exit, every retreat path, every lane of escape. They had been there the entire time, waiting in perfect silence. On the Terran flagship, Rourke watched it unfold with the cold focus of a man who had prepared for this day his entire life. Transmit response, he said. A second message was sent. It didn't come through formal channels. It came through every frequency the Council used, cutting into their systems like a storm through a locked door. You came to blackmail a world. You found a wall instead. Then the sky lit up. Every Leviathan-class railgun fired at once, blue-white streaks of energy tearing through the void, hitting the Council's forward ships before they could even raise their shields. The impact was silent in space, but the fire burned like a sunrise. Council ships exploded in waves, their perfect formations shattering like glass under a hammer. Panic flooded the enemy channels. Shields failing. Multiple hull breaches. They're everywhere. The Council admirals screamed for order, but there was no order to be found. For the first time in their long history, they weren't the hunters. They were the ones being hunted. On Earth, civilians didn't hear the battle directly. But those who stood beneath the night sky swore they felt something. A distant vibration, like the world itself holding its breath. In the Council flagship, Zekar clung to the rail of his command chair as another volley slammed into his fleet. "Retreat!" he shouted. "Get us out of here." But the navigation officers didn't respond. They couldn't. The retreat vectors were already blocked. The human fleet wasn't just attacking. It was closing in. Slowly. Deliberately. Like a predator circling its prey, not in a rush to eat, but to make sure the prey understood exactly what it had done wrong. Zekar's second-in-command stared at the black shapes on the scanner, his voice breaking. "We thought they were weak." Zekar didn't answer. He finally understood what those 3 words meant. Never threaten humanity. And somewhere deep inside him, for the first time in his life, the predator felt the cold, sharp edge of fear. The battle began like a storm that no one saw coming, silent at first, then violent enough to make the stars themselves seem to shiver. The Council fleet that had once stretched proudly across the edge of the solar system was now trapped in a tightening ring of black steel and blue fire. They had come expecting a trembling world, a desperate people ready to surrender. But what they found was an enemy that had been waiting in the dark for years. Patient, quiet, deadly. Human ships didn't scream into battle. They didn't broadcast threats. They moved like shadows sliding through the void, their engines whispering like predators circling prey that didn't even know it was already bleeding. On the bridge of the Council flagship, Admiral Zekar's voice cracked as he shouted orders. The polished arrogance from hours earlier was gone, replaced by the jagged panic of a hunter caught in its own trap. Form defensive walls. Redirect shield frequencies. Launch counterstrike, he roared, but the commands were too slow, too desperate. Human railguns were already tearing through the first line of alien cruisers, the bright glow of their impacts painting the black space in streaks of cold light. Massive warships that had conquered countless worlds were splitting apart in silence, their hulls torn like paper. In Terran command, Admiral Rourke stood perfectly still, eyes locked on the tactical map. No shouting. No panic. He had planned for this exact moment for 2 decades. Around him, officers moved like one machine, feeding orders to fleets that were already moving before the words were finished. Leviathan's Alpha through Echo, lock the rear, one commander reported. Hunter wings moving in. Enemy retreat vectors closing. Rourke's answer was a low, calm, good. Let them feel it. Above Neptune's orbit, the second wave of human ships uncloaked, sliding into position with terrifying precision. Council captains, watching from their shattered bridges, finally understood the scale of what they faced. They weren't up against a desperate species trying to survive. They were up against something that had prepared, something that had planned this for far longer than they had ever imagined. Humanity hadn't been silent because it was weak. It had been silent because silence is what predators use when they are setting the perfect kill. The alien fleet tried to form up, but every attempt to maneuver ended in flames. Council destroyers broke formation as rail slugs the size of buildings tore through their hulls. An entire wing of their forward fleet vanished in a single blinding blast from the Vigilant Dawn's primary cannon. Zekar gripped the edge of his chair, claws digging deep into the metal as the holographic display of his fleet turned from solid red lines to flickering, dying lights. "This can't be," he muttered under his breath. But it was, and it was too late to turn it back. In the quiet of deep space, human interceptors moved like knives through water. They didn't charge blindly. They picked targets with surgical precision, cutting through enemy engines, taking out command bridges, hitting communications hubs first to turn the alien fleet deaf and blind. One by one, Council ships lost contact with each other, their networks collapsing under coordinated strikes. For centuries, the Council had been the voice that spoke, and the galaxy listened. Now they were the ones surrounded by silence, and that silence was terrifying. A Council cruiser near the flank tried to break through the ring of human ships, firing all its cannons in a wide arc. It didn't make it far. A Hunter-class frigate, half its size but twice as fast, intercepted and hit its reactor with a single precise rail slug. The cruiser didn't explode in some cinematic flash. It just broke in half quietly and drifted into the void like everything else that had once believed it couldn't fall. Back on the Council flagship, screams filled the command bridge. "We've lost the forward line. Shields are collapsing. They're everywhere." The panic spread like fire through dry leaves. Officers who once laughed at the idea of humans were now scrambling over each other, trying to make sense of a battle they had already lost. Meanwhile, Rourke's voice remained steady. "They're trying to break at Vector 4, an officer reported. "Close it," Rourke answered. Two Leviathan-class dreadnoughts shifted position, engines burning cold blue. In perfect silence, they sealed off the last escape corridor, their massive shadows stretching across the battlefield. The Council fleet had nowhere left to go. For the first time in their history, the Council forces weren't looking at prey. They were staring at something far worse, a predator that didn't forgive, didn't negotiate, and didn't roar. Humanity fought like the void itself had chosen sides. Zekar slammed his clawed hand against the console, his eyes wide and unfocused. "They were supposed to kneel," he hissed. "They were supposed to." But the words died as another blast ripped through the hull of one of their flagships, the shockwave lighting up his view with fire and smoke. He staggered back, realizing the truth he'd spent his life ignoring. The humans weren't weak. They had never been weak. And above the burning Council ships, the Terran fleet advanced, not like a wave, but like a wall. Slow, cold, inevitable. "Sir," an alien officer whispered to Zekar, his voice shaking. "We're not fighting prey. We're fighting hunters." On Earth, the command room was silent, the way a storm is silent after it's already decided who will survive. Admiral Rourke watched the last red lines flicker on the tactical display. "They thought they could blackmail us," he said softly. "Let them learn why we don't answer to threats." As the Council flagship tried to pull away, a single Leviathan locked its targeting array on it. One shot. One rail slug. The ship's armor cracked like a skull under a hammer, the light inside it blooming into the void. The Council fleet began to scatter, but there was nowhere left to scatter to. The noose was already too tight. What the Council had called a blackmail wasn't a negotiation. It was an invitation to its own destruction. And now, the galaxy's loudest rulers were learning something they had long forgotten. Humans don't kneel. They wait. They sharpen. They strike. The blackmail had turned into a slaughter. The silence of the void was no longer the Council's weapon. It belonged to Earth. The last phase of the battle didn't roar like the beginning. It burned low and steady like a storm that had already decided its winner long before the wind started to blow. The Council fleet that once floated proudly like a wall of silver and gold was now nothing more than broken metal scattered across the stars. Their warships, once symbols of fear across the galaxy, were now silent tombs drifting in the dark. The solar system had become a graveyard for the arrogant, A reminder that Earth was not a prize to be taken but a trap waiting for the foolish to step inside. The void itself seemed heavier, as if it had been holding its breath and was now watching the end of something old. Admiral Zekar stood on what was left of his command bridge, the floor cracked, smoke curling up like thin ghosts. The once bright control panels were nothing but shattered sparks. Alarms blinked weakly in the red glow, and his officers, those same smug faces from hours earlier, now looked like frightened animals, some clutching their wounds, some staring at the black shapes of human warships surrounding them from every angle. He looked out through the broken viewport and saw them. Leviathan-class dreadnoughts, black and silent, surrounding what remained of his fleet like wolves circling a bleeding deer. He had led dozens of wars, crushed rebellions, conquered empires, and broken species who dared to say no to the Council. But here, he couldn't even breathe without tasting defeat. "Admiral," one of his officers whispered, her voice shaking like fragile glass. "We have no shields left, no engines. The fleet is gone." He didn't answer. What was left to say? Every word he had spoken with arrogance before now felt like ash in his mouth. He had thought Earth would kneel. But the humans hadn't knelt. They hadn't even flinched. They had waited, hidden behind their silence, and when the moment came, they struck with the cold precision of something far more dangerous than the Council had ever imagined. On the other side of the battlefield, aboard the Terran flagship Vigilant Dawn, Admiral Rourke stood on the bridge, hands behind his back, eyes steady. The giant map before him showed no more red. Only the faint, fading echoes of enemy ships drifting like dying embers in a sea of darkness. His officers moved quietly, their voices low but steady. No one celebrated. There was no shouting, no music, no victory speech. Humanity didn't fight for applause. Humanity fought to make sure no one would ever threaten them again. Enemy command ship detected, an officer reported. They're trying to signal surrender. Rourke's eyes narrowed slightly. For a moment, the bridge was silent. Then he said, "Patch them through." The Council flagship's image appeared on the main screen, shaky and cracked, smoke billowing behind the alien admiral. Zekar's proud voice was gone, replaced by something low and uneven. "We surrender," he said slowly, every word tasting like poison. "Earth will have its independence. Just stop." Rourke didn't smile. He didn't lean forward. His voice was calm, steady, almost too quiet. "You came here to blackmail my people," he said. "You wanted to make us kneel. You thought your fleets made you gods." His eyes hardened, the weight of centuries of human wars behind them. "Now you understand. We don't kneel. We build in silence. And when we rise, it's already too late." Zekar lowered his head. For the first time in his life, he felt something he had never felt on any battlefield. Not anger. Not even shame. It was fear. Real, cold fear. The kind that wraps around your bones and doesn't let go. Rourke gave a single nod to his officers. "Disable their remaining weapons. Board the flagship. We'll take them alive. The galaxy needs to hear their own surrender." Human boarding crafts moved in silence, black and fast, like shadows cutting through what was left of the Council defenses. There was no resistance. The Council soldiers, once feared across entire star systems, dropped their weapons without a word. Some knelt, some cried, some simply stared at the humans walking toward them with the kind of cold precision they couldn't match. For the first time in the Council's history, their enemies weren't begging for mercy, they were the ones begging. Hours later, across every major galactic channel, the image of Admiral Zekar appeared, not as the mighty serpent of the Council, but as a prisoner, standing under the blue and silver crest of Earth. The message was short. The humans didn't need long speeches. "This is what happens," Rourke's voice echoed through every world, "when you try to break us. Humanity does not kneel. Humanity builds. And when you come for us, we make sure you never try again." Across the galaxy, silence followed. Empires that had once mocked Earth now listened. Warlords who once thought humans were fragile began rethinking everything. The Council's blackmail wasn't just a failure, it was a warning. Back on Earth, the night sky was calm again. No explosions. No ships. Just stars. People walked the streets with quiet pride, knowing they didn't just survive. They reminded the galaxy who they were. Rourke stood on the observation deck of the Vigilant Dawn, watching the Council flagship being towed like a broken trophy, the stars stretching out before him. They thought silence meant weakness, he whispered. But silence was the knife. And as the stars burned quietly above, the galaxy understood something it would never forget. You can threaten many worlds, but you never threaten Earth. Because when humanity answers, it doesn't roar. It strikes.